Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us for today's program about Rock Creek Park. My name is Melissa Laureano, and I serve as the Programs Manager for the DC Preservation League. For those of you new to DCPL, we are a Washington, DC citywide nonprofit founded in 1971 that is dedicated to preserving, protecting, and enhancing the historic built environment of the nation's capital. I'd like to first take a moment to acknowledge some of DCPL's top sponsors whose annual financial support helps underwrite free public programs like this one today. They are the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, Kutak Rock, Douglas Development Corporation, Antunovich Associates, Atlantic Refinishing and Restoration, Robert Benson Photography, Fire Blinder Bell, Building Innovation Hub, Edens, EHC Traceries, KCE Structural Engineers, Quinn Evans, and David Schwartz Architects. So thank you all so much for your dedication to historic preservation in DC. And with that, I am so pleased to introduce you all to today's speaker. Bradley Krueger is the Cultural Resources Program Manager for Rock Creek Park, a unit of the National Park Service. Mr. Krueger is responsible for the management of historic structures, archaeological resources, cultural landscapes, museum collections, and monuments and memorials within the park and its administrative sites. Previously, he was the Cultural Resource Specialist at the George Washington Memorial Parkway in Virginia. And prior to joining the National Park Service, he worked as a senior nautical archaeologist in the private sector. And with that, I am excited to turn things over to Bradley.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. And I do want to extend a big thank you to the DC Preservation League for inviting me to speak with you all today. So I am going to start sharing my screen. So bear with me, please. All right. So first and foremost, everyone, welcome to Rock Creek Park. Whether you are a runner or a bird watcher, a horseback rider, or if you're a history buff, or if you simply like nature bathing, just being outside amongst the trees and nature, Rock Creek Park has something for you. We typically refer to Rock Creek Park as an oasis, or oftentimes a gem within the nation's capital. And that is absolutely true. And like most gems, there are several facets to the park's history. And I'm very excited today to share some of that rich history with you.
Brad?
Sorry,
yes. We're not seeing the screen share.
Oh, you are not. Oh, that is why. Here we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Aha, excellent. Technology. It will not thwart us today. All right. So as Melissa said, I am the Cultural Resources Program Manager for Rock Creek Park. And she went through the long list of responsibilities that I have here as a steward of the park's many cultural resources. I serve as the park's historian, its archaeologist, and its museum curator. I also advise on the park's historic structures, its cultural and design landscapes, and its monuments and memorials. And then I also serve as the park's Section 106 coordinator for all federal undertakings. So in short, I wear a lot of different hats. But today, my presentation is going to be focused on the early history of Rock Creek Park. This is meant to be a brief overview, so it's not going to get too into the weeds. And then the second half of my talk is really going to be a short virtual tour that highlights some of the notable historic sites that we administer. So before we begin, I do want to just take a quick moment to acknowledge that where I'm coming from today at the Rock Creek Park headquarters, just to acknowledge that this is ancestral lands of Indigenous tribes. These tribes are represented today by the peoples of the Piscataway, the Pamunkey, Delaware, Catawba, and Eastern Shawnee, and others that call the Potomac and Anacostia watersheds home. We recognize and honor their continued connection to this land and their stewardship of its many resources. So as we start on our journey through history, it is always helpful to start with a map. So here we see a map of Rock Creek Park, and it is highlighted in green. So the park is also known as U.S. Reservation 339. And that's just a numerical indicator for federal land parcels. For example, the White House is known as Reservation 1. So Rock Creek Park is Reservation 339, and it consists of over 1,700 acres that stretch from the National Zoo northward toward the DC and Maryland border. But in addition to Rock Creek Park proper, the park as an administrative unit manages 98 additional sites in DC outside of the Rock Creek Valley. These areas are depicted in light green on the map, and they include the Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway, Glover Archibald Park, Montrose Park and Dumbarton Oaks Park in Georgetown, and the Civil War defenses of Washington. In total, the park manages nearly 3,000 acres in northern Washington, DC. So first, let us begin with the original inhabitants of the park, those being American Indians. You'll be interested to know that people have lived in the greater Washington, DC area for the past 13,000 years. The Rock Creek Valley specifically seems to have only been inhabited occasionally until about 4,000 years ago, mostly by hunting parties or people passing through. Now, this information primarily comes to us from archaeology, which is the study of past peoples through their material culture. Around 2000 BC, during the late Archaic period, people began to quarry stone from the huge beds of ancient river cobbles that are exposed along some of the bluffs around Rock Creek. These early residents made use of a very tough stone known as quartzite, as it was the preferred material for making spear points and other stone tools. Soapstone was another commonly used material. So here we see examples of preforms, also known as turtlebacks, which represent the early stages of stone tool production. These preforms would have been worked and shaped into more functional tools, such as hand axes and projectile points. This process is sometimes referred to as flint knapping. Projectile points such as these are commonly known as arrowheads, and they have been found all throughout Rock Creek Park. Today, we are not exactly certain when or for how long quarries were in use. However, archaeologists suspect that they were primarily used during the late Archaic period from about 2000 to 1500 BC. So moving forward in history, the accounts of English explorer Captain John Smith during the early 17th century also provide clues about the early inhabitants of the Washington, DC area. On June 16th, 1608, Smith and 14 other men from the Jamestown colony set out aboard a small open barge to explore the upper reaches of the Potomac River. The men proceeded upriver as far as Great Falls, and along the way, Smith observed and recorded many American Indian villages. Smith later included these villages on his historic map of Virginia, published in 1612. His detailed map still serves today as an invaluable aid in understanding the nature of Native American occupation, population density, and probable tribal affiliation. The area that we are interested in is outlined in red. So here is a close-up view of the Potomac, with the bottom of the V on your screen representing the convergence between the Potomac and the Anacostia rivers. And on this map, north is to your right. All of the groups depicted on Smith's map were likely Algonquin-speaking peoples of the Eastern Woodlands culture. And as we can see, there are no villages or settlements located in the Rock Creek Valley, but there were notable places nearby. On the Virginia side of the Potomac was Namaraquin, which translates from Eastern Algonquin into fishing place. On the Maryland side was Nacotchtank, meaning town of traders. It is very possible that inhabitants of both villages traversed the land that is now known as Rock Creek Park. The arrival of Europeans, though, drastically reduced the populations of these native cultures through disease and warfare. Today, however, many American Indians still call the Washington, DC area home, including the Piscataway Indian Nation and Tayac Territory, the Piscataway Conoy Confederacy and subtribes, the Cedarville Band of the Piscataway Conoy, among others. Moving on, we arrive in the 18th and 19th century. So in this period, the Rock Creek Valley was a mix of woodlands, fields, and pastures. Farms and plantations in the 18th century primarily produced tobacco, which would have been sent to the markets and port at Georgetown for trade. In the late 18th century, cultivation shifted to wheat and grain production. Historic maps show us that larger tracts of land featured tenant houses, which suggests that tenant farming also occurred. Additionally, milling took place along Rock Creek. The earliest reported mill was in place at the mouth of Rock Creek by 1749, and several mills were built along the creek thereafter, including Pierce Mill, Blagden Mill, and Lyons Mill, pictured here. These mills made use of water power to move large wheels to grind a variety of grain, including wheat and corn, as well as other goods such as paper, lumber, and fertilizer. The Rock Creek Valley was also well suited for plant nurseries and greenhouses, the most notable of which was owned by the Pierce family, which we'll discuss a bit later. It should be noted that many of these farms, mills, and nurseries made use of enslaved people for labor, which was legal in DC until April of 1862. These individuals worked as domestic servants, field hands, and in other labor roles. Many of their stories are usually lost to history, but these individuals were present and played a significant role in the development of the national capital area. During the Civil War, the section of the Rock Creek Park, or excuse me, the Rock Creek Valley experienced drastic change. To protect the capital, Union forces constructed a defensive ring around Washington that consisted of 68 forts, 93 batteries, 800 cannon, all connected by 30 miles of military road. Large swaths of forested land were cleared to provide troops with clear sight lines. In the Rock Creek Valley, one such fort was constructed, Fort DeRussy, as well as a number of smaller support batteries. Fort DeRussy, along with Fort Stevens, seen here, represented the northernmost portion of the Civil War defenses of Washington. On July 11th of 1864, Confederate General Jubal Early decided to test Fort Stevens in hopes of reaching the capital. Over a two-day skirmish, Union soldiers were successful in repelling the attack, but not without costs. During this engagement, President Abraham Lincoln visited Fort Stevens, where he is nearly shot as he looked out onto the battlefield. And typically it is reported that there are several people that attribute the saying that, get down, you fool. This was the only time in US history where a sitting president was under enemy fire. After the war, the fortifications were abandoned and the land was returned to its original owners. Now, the story of Rock Creek Park actually begins with the White House, which was historically known as the Executive Mansion. During the 1860s, and possibly prior, there was general dissatisfaction with the configuration and location of the Executive Mansion. As it had yet to be expanded, it offered its residents very little privacy, and it was situated near the Washington City Canal, where waste and sewage were discharged into the shallows of the Potomac. In fact, to escape this crowded and unhealthy situation, President Lincoln often retreated to a cottage at the Soldiers' Home beyond the city limits. In 1866, the US Senate directed its Committee on Public Buildings and Grounds to investigate possible locations for a new presidential mansion and public park. A report was submitted by Major Nathaniel Mickler on January 29, 1867, and he recommended that the mansion should be a secluded retreat, whereas the park should be publicly accessible. Mickler's park proposal was essentially a large-scale version of New York's Central Park, which he believed was the most important work of its kind undertaken in America. In 1890, Congress passed legislation establishing Rock Creek Park for the benefit and enjoyment of the American public. The creation of Rock Creek Park was seen as a remedy to the urban congestion and contagion that often plagued many urban centers, and it provided residents with a means to escape the rigors of city life. Its creation is also linked to the conservation movement of the 19th century, as park advocates sought to protect its unrivaled natural scenery. In fact, Rock Creek Park is the third oldest national park site and the first urban national federal park. This was the same year Congress authorized California's Sequoia, General Grant, and Yosemite national parks. Although Rock Creek Park did not approach the scale of these vast wilderness preserves, and it lacked the national title, it was created to preserve irreplaceable natural resources and remains today an urban gem within the national park system. So following the creation of the park in 1890, the Rock Creek Park Commission began the task of acquiring land for the park. Now, unbeknownst to many, the park was not simply vacant land. In fact, it had been routinely worked by tenant farmers since the 18th century. And by 1890, dozens of people lived within the present-day boundaries of the park. Lists made in 1894 and 1895 show that there were at least 21 properties with buildings that existed in the Rock Creek Valley. Now, most of these residences were small frame dwellings and usually consisted of a single room or two. Some had cellars, while others had outbuildings like stables or greenhouses. Other buildings like the Pierce-Klingle Estate and Pierce Mill were made of stone and were more substantial. The commission did not immediately force these residents to vacate. Following the government's purchase of these properties, some residents decided to stay in their homes as tenants and pay rent to the government. The cost of rent varied based on the type and condition of the building, which ranged from $3 to $20 per month. So here we see a reconstruction of Sarah Whitby's house, an African-American woman who was a tenant within the park. And this reconstruction is based off of sketches by Delancey Gill done in 1883. Now, some residents left on their own as the park was being developed. And by 1912, park managers canceled all remaining lease agreements. So most of these small dwellings simply fell down on their own and then were eventually cleared from the park. So really the only remnants that exist today are through archaeology. So following the acquisition of property, the next step was to get people into the park. And this required the construction of new roads. Now, some roads already existed and simply needed to be improved, such as the Pierce Mill Road, which was known as Park Road, which was built in 1831, and then also Grant Road, which was constructed during the Civil War in 1862. But other roads were needed. The majority of road construction program took place from 1897 to 1941. The first road constructed included Beach Drive along Rock Creek, followed by Ridge and Glover Road, Wise Road, and Ross Drive. Other roads followed after that, such as Sherrill Drive and Bingham Drive in the 1920s, and Piney Branch Parkway in the 1930s. In the late 1950s, many of these roadways were reconstructed and had their alignments slightly altered to make them safer. But otherwise, these roads have not been changed significantly from when they were originally built. So in total, the park's road system is just about 20 miles long. And the construction of new roadways also necessitated the construction of new bridges. The most iconic bridge in the park can be seen here, which is known as Boulder Bridge. Boulder Bridge was constructed between 1901 and 1902. This is a reinforced concrete and steel arch bridge faced with worn boulders and stone. It's worth noting that this bridge set the tone for the overall aesthetic of Rock Creek Park, that being a rustic, stone-based architecture. In fact, the concept of rustic parkitecture originated in Rock Creek Park and was applied to other federal parks out west. Other notable bridges in the park include the Pinehurst Bridge, the Old Military Road Bridge, Milkhouse Ford, and the Morrow Drive Bridge. In addition to roads, park managers also built a variety of trails and footbridges for visitors. In 1917, though, park managers hired the Olmsted brothers to create a new design and management plan for Rock Creek Park. The sons of renowned landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, John Charles, and Frederick Law Jr. sought, quote, the permanent preservation of its wonderful natural beauty and the making of that beauty accessible to the public without spoiling the scenery in the process, unquote. The Olmsted brothers continued their father's legacy, completing projects all over the country and advocating for public parks and park systems that balance the best aspects of city and country life, as well as green spaces that provided for social and psychological well-being. For Rock Creek, the Olmsted brothers began their work by completing an extensive reconnaissance survey of the entire park. The following year, in 1918, they issued a detailed plan to guide the future protection and development of the Rock Creek Valley. The major tenets of the plan included preserving and restoring the natural scenery, that the park must be opened up to the driving, riding, and walking public for recreational purposes, and that adequate transportation must be provided to and into the park. These objectives speak to the varied functionality of the park, which was intended to protect and preserve natural and scenic resources while carefully balancing recreational opportunities. Regarding the preservation of the valley's natural resources, I would like to read the following quote. The destruction of even a single tree may spoil the beauty of some choice bit of scenery, and every such loss is a step toward deterioration. The inroads of disease and insect pests are so insidious, they so easily attain dangerous proportions before they are recognized, that the importance of constant, keen watchfulness cannot be overemphasized. This quote speaks to the importance of active management that the Olmsteds believed was required in order for the park to be successful and thrive as intended. So as seen by the different colors on these maps, the plan focused on the division of the landscape into 4 primary vegetation management zones, including natural forest, open woodland, evergreen groves, and open grassland that would provide for views and vistas. This also allowed for a high level of plant diversity and open spaces for recreation. The plan recommended the creation of recreational components, such as picnic groves by the creek, ball fields, walking and hiking paths, and trails for horseback riding, all to be designed in such a way that is harmonious with the natural setting. While the 1918 plan did not go so far as to delineate planting beds or design trails, the firm's work engendered a management philosophy that resulted in the naturalistic character of the park that is still evident today. So the National Park Service didn't exist until 1916. So as you can see, Rock Creek Park was an early forerunner in the conservation movement. The park was transferred to the National Park Service in 1933. And today, Rock Creek Park administers 265 historic structures, 82 archaeological sites, 43 cultural landscapes, 32 monuments and memorials, 3 museum collections totaling over 17,000 museum objects, and a National Historic Landmark. Additionally, the park is responsible for the preservation and management of cultural and natural resources. We have numerous recreational facilities, and we provide for the enjoyment of the American public. So just a few quick statistics. The park has over 700 species of flowering plants and 9 species of coniferous tree. Our facilities include a 65-stall public horse stable, miles of unpaved and paved and multi-use trails, picnic groves, tennis courts, ball fields, 10 community gardens, playgrounds, a nature center and planetarium, boathouses, a golf course, a 3,700-seat amphitheater, and a 7,500-seat tennis stadium, and much, much more. On average, Rock Creek Park typically sees over 2 million visitors per year. So that is just the quick version of the early history of the park. So now we're going to pivot just a little bit, and I'm going to highlight a few of the historic sites that the park administers. So this is somewhat of a virtual tour that starts in the southern part of our administrative area and heads northward into the park. So we're going to start our tour at the Old Stone House in historic Georgetown, located in Northwest Washington, D.C. So the Old Stone House is believed to be the oldest standing structure on its original foundation in Washington, and is one of the last surviving examples of 18th century architecture in the city. The house is listed in the National Register of Historic Places and is also a contributing resource to the Georgetown Historic District. The Old Stone House was built in 1766 in what was then the British colony of Maryland. Its continued existence today is due to a case of mistaken identity. You see, people believed George Washington worked and stayed there when surveying the newly established capital city, but he did not. George Washington actually stayed at the Fountain Inn nearby. The confusion came with the name of the proprietor of the Fountain Inn, which was also known as Suter's Tavern. John Suter Sr. and his son, John Suter Jr., they ran a clock shop at the Old Stone House. So there was a bit of a confusion as to which Suter was where. Today, the Old Stone House serves as somewhat of a happy accident and an opportunity to learn about colonial history in the heart of a major shopping and tourism district in Washington, D.C. The house stands on M Street Northwest in Georgetown, which was originally laid out in 1752. In 1764, Christopher Lehman, a cabinet maker, and his family purchased the lot and built the Old Stone House sometime between 1765 and 1766. Since then, the building has been used as a residence and a shop, including, as I mentioned, a clock shop. The house is architecturally styled as a Pennsylvanian, and most of the exterior is original. The house was expanded twice in its history and actually served as a car dealership for a time prior to being purchased by the US government for $90,000. Over time, this property, which includes both the house and the grounds, served a variety of businesses as well as a home. In addition to a clockmaker shop, it also served as a carpentry shop, paint shop, a convenience store, and a car lot. The NPS substantially renovated the building in the mid-1950s and opened the house to the public as a museum and living history exhibit. So today, the site serves as a museum. In the past few years, the park team and partners have reimagined the entire house in an effort to make it more interactive for visitors. These images show what the space has been reimagined as. Updated park store in the top left photo. There's new temporary exhibits featuring topics and timelines. And there's an interactive parlor space where visitors can play games from the past, similar to how families would have interacted with the space historically. All right, our next stop on our tour will take us north of the White House along 16th Street to Meridian Hill Park, which is also known as Malcolm X Park. Located at the intersection of Columbia Heights, Adams Morgan, and the Shaw neighborhoods, Meridian Hill Park is a favorite site amongst visitors. Its high walls, dramatic cascades, fountains, statuary, and incredible views are iconic to DC. The park is listed in the National Register of Historic Places as a National Historic Landmark due to its architecture and landscape design. The concept of a park originated with Mary Foote Henderson, wife of Senator John Henderson of Missouri. They built a castle at the corner of 16th Street and Boundary Street in the 1880s. And Mary made it her mission to develop the 16th Street corridor as a ceremonial gateway to the nation's capital. She also advocated for the development of 16th Street as President's Avenue and lobbied for the placement of monuments and embassies along Meridian Hill. Legislation passed in 1910 authorized the acquisition of the land for a park. At the time, though, there were at least 25 residences within the bounds of the future park. 9 of them were owned by African Americans, and the remaining were leased to African Americans by white landlords. Newspaper descriptions called these residents dilapidated dwellings and shacks and unsightly messes. This was a tactic used by newspapers to typically sway popular opinion. As seen in historic photographs, though, these residences were certainly not shacks or messes, but rather modest wooden homes. The properties were eventually condemned and the residents displaced to make way for the new park. The design for Meridian Hill Park was developed by George Burnap, a landscape architect with the Office of Public Buildings and Grounds. Burnap looked to Italian Renaissance gardens and Baroque parks for inspiration. His concept featured fountains, formal gardens, and a great terrace overlooking cascades and a reflecting pool. Work began before the onset of World War I, and in 1915, John Early began construction of the massive retaining walls along 16th Street. Through trial and error, Early developed an experimental concrete with a stone aggregate finish, which he named architectural concrete. This process can be seen throughout the park today. Burnap was replaced by landscape architect Horace Peasley in 1917, who revised Burnap's plans, opting for an open mall at the upper portion of the park and simplifying the design for the reflecting pool area. The upper mall was open to the public by 1923, and by 1936, the park was complete. As can be seen in historic photographs, much of this construction work was done by African American workers. In addition to the impressive landscape architecture, the park also has a rich African American history. As some of you may know, the park was symbolically renamed Malcolm X Park in the early 1970s during the Civil Rights Movement, as it was the site of numerous demonstrations, protests, and community events. One would be remiss for discussing Meridian Hill Park and not commenting on its long-standing drum circle. You may be surprised to know that its roots go back to the Civil Rights Movement. The drumming started in 1965 by lone drummer Baba Ngoma, the house drummer at the Howard Theater, as a way to honor Malcolm X. Other Black Washingtonians soon joined in the drumming as a way to commemorate the fallen Black leader, express their African heritage, and to release tension. Drum circle quickly became a weekly tradition, and it was an expression of Black consciousness during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. Over the year, as the neighborhood has changed, the drum circle has also changed, and people of all races, backgrounds, nationalities began to join the circle. The result is a musical free-for-all that can feature styles from all over the world, including African, Afro-Cuban, Latino, West African, and others. And the circle today features more than just drumming, as one can also see dancers, jugglers, and other performers. Today, the park continues to be an important fixture to the community due to the efforts of our dedicated partner groups, such as the National Park Foundation and Washington Parks and People, And we appreciate the activism, support, and dedication of all of our partners who continue to make Meridian Hill Park a great place to visit. I would like to note, as some of you may have noticed, the park has been undergoing rehabilitation for several years. Currently, work is focused on the lower plaza area, which is surrounding the reflecting pool and the President James Buchanan Memorial. The exposed aggregate plaza is being replaced in kind, and a new universally accessible path is being constructed off of 16th Street. Additionally, the project will see the reconstruction and reinstallation of the Edith Noyes armillary sphere that was damaged and removed from the park several decades ago. All right, so our next stop on our virtual tour is to the historic Pierce-Klingle Estate, located in the southern end of Rock Creek Park, and it's where I'm coming from you today. So situated at the southern end of Rock Creek Park, atop a bluff known as Linnaean Hill, is the Pierce-Klingle Mansion. Developed by Joshua Pierce in 1823, the estate originally consisted of 82 acres overlooking Rock Creek. Pierce received the property from his father, Isaac Pierce, and built the 10-room farmhouse of locally sourced granite in a vernacular interpretation of the federal style. Pierce enlarged the house in 1843 with a one-wing story on the west side of the building. And then he also oversaw construction of a two-story front entryway and a cast iron rear porch in the 1860s. Besides these alterations and minor repairs over the years, the exterior of the mansion has been well preserved over the past 2 centuries. The mansion is one of 4 surviving structures built by Pierce. The others include a utility shed, a potting shed, and a carriage house. Linnaean Hill represents the site of the first commercial nursery and garden center in DC. Pierce named his property Linnaean Hill in honor of Carl von Linnaeus, the famous Swedish botanist and father of modern taxonomy. As a horticulturalist, Pierce grew ornamental trees and shrubs, also fruit trees and a variety of flowers, most notably prized varieties of camellias. In 1826, he built a large glass greenhouse on the lower terrace behind the mansion to assist with the cultivation of his plants, which he supplied to many public parks and reservations, including the White House. He designed the surrounding landscape as a picturesque country garden, taking advantage of the surrounding woodland and steep topography to create dramatic views. Now, Pierce did not operate Linnaean Hill alone. He and his wife, Susan, had no children, so they made use of enslaved labor to run the nursery and his farmstead. Between 1830 and 1860, census records show that as many as 13 enslaved individuals lived at Linnaean Hill. Following emancipation in 1862, Pierce's nephew, Joshua Pierce-Klingle, assisted with running the nursery, along with 2 African-American farmhands. Pierce also hired his formerly enslaved nursery foreman, William Beckett, to resume his duties at the estate. Following the death of Joshua Pierce in 1869, the property passed to his nephew, Joshua Pierce-Klingle. The Klingles occupied the mansion until the early 1890s, when it was acquired by the federal government to create Rock Creek Park. In the following years, park staff used the properties for employee housing. From 1956 to about 1959, the NPS utilized the mansion as the Rock Creek Park Nature Center, which catered largely to school children. Today, the Pierce-Klingle Mansion serves as the headquarters building for Rock Creek Park. Nearly 32 acres of the original estate have been preserved, making Linnaean Hill one of the most intact 19th century country estates in Northwest Washington, DC. Okay, so we're going to move just a little bit further north of the Klingle Mansion, and we are going to come upon the rustic stone mill known as Pierce Mill. Built in 1829 by Isaac Pierce, The mill was a giant machine made of many smaller machines using water from Rock Creek as power to cut corn, wheat, and rye. The building is constructed of granite that was quarried along Broad Branch Road. It uses a system that was developed by Oliver Evans that allows the mill to operate continuously and made labor in the mill much easier. Now, Isaac Pierce was not a miller himself, and he did not operate the mill on his own. Instead, he leased the mills to others who operated it for him. Milling was a very lucrative business in the Washington area during the 1800s, so the building of a mill in 1829 was a good investment at the time. Isaac's estate eventually grew to almost 2,000 acres and included a large family house, a distillery, a mill and miller's house, a spring house, cow barn, potato barn, a carriage barn, and a variety of outbuildings. Succeeding generations further developed the family's mill, sawmill, orchard, and tree nursery. Much like the nursery run by Joshua Pierce, the Pierce family used enslaved individuals to provide much of the labor at Pierce Mill. According to the 1820 census, Isaac Pierce had 9 enslaved people when the mill was built. This number increased to 17 in 1850 and to 21 by 1862, when slavery was abolished in DC. The federal government began buying land to create Rock Creek Park in the 1890s, and the mill, carriage barn, and spring house were purchased from the descendants of Pierce Shoemaker, who died in 1891. When the government purchased the mill, they made an agreement with the existing lessees to continue operating it. So these individuals continued to lease the mill from the federal government until 1897, when the main shaft of the mill broke. The government assessed the damage and determined that it would cost more to repair the mill and keep it operating than was being generated from the lease. So the decision was made to keep the mill closed. This is a great photo, and it's from 1918, and it shows the mill as well as early vehicles and bicyclists. And as you can see, the mill has not changed much in the last 2 decades. During the early years of the park, the mill became a favorite place for recreation and picnicking alongside Rock Creek. In the 1920s, a comfort station was constructed immediately north of the barn, and a parking lot installed between the barn and the mill. In the early 20th century, the mill became a tea house, which saw the construction of an enclosed porch on its north side, essentially replacing the old water wheel. An African-American woman named Hattie Sewell managed the tea house in 1920 to 1921. After a year, though, her lease was terminated under questionable circumstances, likely due to racism. Later, the tea house was managed by other groups, including the Girl Scouts. This image from the 1920s shows the porch. In 1934, the new superintendent of the National Capital Parks, C. Marshall Finian, proposed several restoration projects within Rock Creek Park. These projects would be funded by the Works Progress Administration and completed by the Civilian Conservation Corps. So this project saw the removal of the enclosed porch and the addition of a new water wheel on the north face. The inner workings of the mill were also restored, replicating the old Oliver Evans system that had run during the 19th century. Robert Little, a veteran miller, was hired to run the mill, which began operating on October 27th, 1936. Since then, the NPS has operated Pierce Mill as a working grist mill. Today, Pierce Mill still serves as a community hub for students, individuals, friends, and families. The National Park Service works closely with the Friends of Pierce Mill in co-presenting educational programs, as well as helping to lead tours with park staff on the weekends. And each year, the NPS and the Friends host Heritage Day, which is a celebration of the mill's rich history. So our final stop on our tour will take us to the Civil War defenses of Washington, also known as the CWDW. Sometimes you'll even refer to these parcels as the Fort Circle Parks, as the defenses ringed the capital city. So we've already learned this ring of forts and batteries protected the capital during the Civil War, and it made Washington, D.C. one of the most heavily fortified cities in the world. Today, Rock Creek Park manages 9 of the 18 NPS-managed Civil War defenses sites. And these include Battery Kemble Park, Fort Reno Park, Fort DeRussy, Fort Stevens Park, Fort Slocum Park, Fort Totten Park, Fort Bunker Hill, and Barnard Hill Park, as well as Battleground National Cemetery. In addition to these 9 sites, the park also administers several small batteries and earthworks. So the defenses really do vary today. One of the most recognizable sites is that of Fort Stevens, located along 13th Street Northwest. The fort was originally constructed in 1862 and was actually an expansion of an earlier fort known as Fort Massachusetts. It consisted of a high parapet wall along its north side that mounted 11 cannons, whereas the rear was enclosed by a wooden stockade. The land on which Fort Stevens was built was originally owned by an African-American woman named Elizabeth Proctor Thomas and her siblings. In September of 1861, Union troops took possession of her land and ultimately destroyed her home, as well as her barn, orchard, and gardens in order to build Fort Massachusetts. According to Thomas, at the time her house was being demolished, she was holding her 6-month-old baby and weeping beneath a sycamore tree. As soldiers removed her belongings, a tall, slender man dressed in the black approached her and said, "It is hard, but you shall reap a great reward." The man offering comfort was believed to be President Abraham Lincoln. Thomas's encounter with the stranger was a story she told throughout her life, helping her story to gain recognition as part of the history of Fort Stevens. Following the Civil War, Elizabeth Thomas continued to reside near Fort Stevens. She remained the owner of portions of the fort and continued to amass a considerable amount of land in this vicinity. At the turn of the century, Thomas sold some of her Fort Stevens acreage to an influential Washingtonian who hoped to preserve the remaining earthworks and establish a military park. During the 1920s, the federal government acquired Fort Stevens, and the site became a unit of the National Park Service in the 1930s. During the Great Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps reconstructed a portion of the fort, which is what we see today. Now, Fort Stevens is a rare case, and it is the only case in which a CWDW site has been reconstructed. The majority of the CWDW sites consist of a series of earthworks in varying degrees of preservation. One of the best preserved sites is that of Fort DeRussy in Rock Creek Park, which is situated on a high hill just north of Military Road. The fort was constructed in 1861 in the shape of a trapezoid, armed with 7 guns, and then later expanded to 11 guns and mortars, including a massive 100-pounder Parrott rifle. It consisted of various earthen structures, including a trench, parapet wall, gun platforms, a sally port, and magazine. The fort was heavily engaged during the Battle of Fort Stevens in July of 1864, as it provided battery support to Fort Stevens to the northeast, and also engaged rebel infantry north of the defenses. When the park was established in 1890, the remains of the fort were preserved as a curiosity. From these photos, you can see that the area is heavily forested. Now, this was not the case during the Civil War, as the landscape surrounding the fort was entirely cleared. Currently, the NPS is developing an earthworks management plan for our CWDW sites, which will identify strategies and provide recommendations for how best to preserve these sites into the future. Given the sensitivity of the site, we do ask visitors to please stay off the earthworks to ensure their continued preservation. So today, the MPS provides a variety of tours and interpretive programs of our many CWDW sites. We also work with our partners and volunteers to help preserve the earthworks. And these two photos show the removal of the removal of invasive plant species at Battery Kimball as a way to help preserve the original structures. So with that, that concludes our virtual tour of the park. I just want to thank everyone for logging in today. Hopefully found this to be educational. And if you're looking for more information about the park, I would invite you all to visit our website, which is the link shown here, www.nps.gov/ROCR. So with that, I will conclude the presentation, and I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us today.
And thank you so much, Bradley, for such a wonderful presentation. I really learned a lot, and we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with for us today. So we do have a few questions, and please, folks, again, you can put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or in the chat. And to our friends over on Facebook, please feel free to ask questions too. My colleague Zach is over there and he'll pass those along to us as well. So let's see here. Stacy wants to know, is Pierce Mill still used to grind grains today?
It is. Pierce Mill does operate and provides demonstrations, but only limited for demonstration purposes. So in order to keep the machinery in good working order, we do need to rotate the water wheel and move the stones. So we typically try to do this once a month. With COVID, unfortunately, a lot of our facilities have been closed for the last few years, but the mill is open on the weekends. So I'm not sure when exactly they're doing the milling demonstrations, but I am happy to report that the mill is open.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do they have their own like website on the NPS site, or could they like see a calendar through your Rock Creek Park?
The Rock Creek Park website will include information on Pierce Mill. So you should be able to go there for all the information.
Great. Another question, to what extent does Rock Creek Park have the resources it needs to preserve and maintain its historic assets?
That is a very good question. So just to answer that with an example, I am a program manager and I am a program of one. So for all 99 parcels that Rock Creek Park manages, I am the only cultural resource professional. So that is why I am required to wear a lot of hats. So, you know, as with many federal agencies or preservation agencies, we could always use much more assistance with funding and personnel. But, you know, as public servants and stewards, we do what we do because we love it. And, you know, there's a great public benefit. You know, I would love help, but, you know, that's just not in the cards at this moment, but maybe in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I'm sure like if folks are interested in like volunteering, even they can find that information through the website as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. We have wonderful partner organizations that assist with volunteering. Some of them include the Friends of Pierce Mill, the Rock Creek Conservancy, Washington Parks and People, and the Dumbarton Oaks Parks Conservancy. So a lot of opportunities for volunteering.
That's great. Let's see. Let's see. So Luis says, I did not know about the history of displacement of Black families for the creation of Meridian Hill Park. Oh, sorry, my cat is, okay, sorry. She said, okay, I did not know about the history of displacement of Black families for the creation of Meridian Hill Park. Is there any effort to illuminate this part of the history? Can you recommend a book or other resources?
That is a great question. So the reason we know that the creation of Meridian Hill Park displaced a Black community is because of a study that was recently completed. The MPS completed a special resource study that specifically focused on the African American history associated with the park from the end of the Civil War through the Civil Rights Movement. That is available on our website. So you can go there to download the full report for free. And there's a lot of history there. And not only was there an African American community, but there was an African American seminary on the grounds that the park eventually occupied. So there's a very rich history, especially regarding civil rights and the civil rights movement. A lot of notable demonstrations and movements and African heritage pride events that took place in the park. So anyone interested in that aspect of history, I would highly encourage you to check out that special resource study.
Oh yeah, definitely will do. And I'll put it again into the chat. So the website is in the chat, everybody. So the direct link is there. You mentioned that the Olmsted plan included open grassland for scenic vistas. Was this not implemented, and if not, why not?
So we do have some open grasslands within Rock Creek Park. Probably one of the most notable is situated just south of Military Road, near the entrance to the park's nature center. But as you go along the interior of the park, there are several clearings where you typically have picnic groves or picnic areas. And these are some of those open areas that the Olmsted talked about. They didn't want just a completely forested park. They wanted to have areas that offered different plant species and variety that could be used for both ecology as well as recreation. So we do manage a variety of meadows. Another one that I can think of is in the Brightwood area, just north of the Rock Creek Tennis Center off of Morrow Drive.
Great. Let's see. So Jim says, I presume that the Carter Barron Amphitheater is a privately operated concession within the park, or is that true?
So the Carter Barron Amphitheater, it is operated by the NPS. We did have a concessionaire operating and running the facility. Unfortunately, though, I believe it was 2015, it was discovered that the stage had suffered some deterioration and was no longer able to support large performances. So the decision was made at that time to temporarily close the amphitheater until we could complete a structural assessment and determine a plan for its eventual rehabilitation. So we are still in that process. We really want to bring the Carter Barron back to life and bring it back to the public. So that is something that we're actively engaged on, but it is going to take us a little bit more time before we can get there.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of our, especially our members know that a lot of these projects, they take time. So yeah, we will all be patiently waiting. So Jim also says, besides the old stone house, what are the other museum sites? And I'm guessing Pierce Mill is also one of them as well.
Yes, so the two real museum sites that the park operates is the Old Stone House in Georgetown and then Pierce Mill in the park. And unfortunately, the Pierce-Klingle Estate, as you can see behind me, that simply is just office space and administrative space. So there are no exhibits. So the two that we do operate are Old Stone House and Pierce Mill. I will let folks know that because of the pandemic, the Old Stone House has been closed for the last couple of years. It has since reopened, but the museum collections are not yet back in the building. So that will be happening sometime either later this year or early next. But the bookstore is open and you can tour the entire first floor. So if you want to check out one of the earliest buildings in DC, I would highly encourage you to check out the Old Stone House.
Very exciting. Let's see. Who ran the park before MPS took it over in 1933? Can you recommend a good published history of the park itself?
So the ownership, or the management rather, I should say, of the park, it jumped a little bit. So initially, when the park was created, there was a commission called the Rock Creek Park Commission that was responsible for acquiring the park lands to actually create the park. From there, I believe it was in the 1890s, the control transferred from the commission to what was called the Rock Creek Board of Control. And that was a board that was made up of DC commissioners and the US Army Corps of Engineers. So really, it was the military that was essentially operating the park at the turn of the 20th century. From there, I believe in 1918, it transferred again from the Board of Control to the Department of Public Parks and Public Buildings and Public Grounds. And they managed Rock Creek Park from 1818 until 1933. Yeah, 1918, 1933.
Wow.
It gets confusing, but yeah, it's not just one agency that had ownership. It did transfer a couple times.
It's really interesting. Can you tell us more about the National Park Service stables for mounted police?
For mounted police. So, so Rock Creek Park has a number of stables. The public stables is known as the Rock Creek Horse Center, and that's located adjacent to the Nature Center and the planetarium. But there are two additional stables that the U.S. Park Police utilize for their mounted patrols. These are located off of Oregon Avenue in the northern part of the park, and then along Beach Drive near the Edgewater stables at Connecticut Avenue.
Oh, okay. Cool. Nicholas wants to know, you may have explained this, but what is the Klingle name connection with Rock Creek?
Yes, so Klingle, that was the last name of Joshua Pierce's nephew. So Joshua Pierce, who built the mansion behind me, he and his wife Susan did not have any children of their own. And it just so happened that his nephew, Joshua Klingle, was orphaned. So he came to live with his aunt and uncle. And when Joshua Pierce passed away in 1867, the property passed to Joshua Klingle. So that's why we typically refer to the mansion as the Pierce-Klingle Estate. That's why you also see in the area Klingle Road. So that harkens back to the Klingle family, also owning this property. Typically, just in park nomenclature, we refer to this as the Klingle Mansion, but its official name is the Pierce-Klingle Estate.
Oh, okay, thank you. Elizabeth wants to know, who was Sherrill Drive named for?
So Sherrill was named after Colonel Clarence Sherrill. He was one of the early park managers under the Office of Public Buildings and Public Grounds. So he was, a military colonel through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So he was not NPS, but he was a park manager. He was embroiled in a little bit of controversy, if I recall correctly, because I believe he was trying to, or he was directed to segregate some of our picnic pavilions and picnic areas. And that was very short-lived. There was a lot of resistance amongst the community, and a member of Congress actually intervened so that that policy could be reversed. And I believe that it was also Colonel Sherrill that terminated Hattie Sewell's contract to operate the Pierce Mill Tea House. So, so we're still trying to uncover a little bit more history about Sherrill and his legacy within the park. But that's what I can recall offhand.
Wow. What property within the park is designated as a National Historic Landmark?
So, so Rock Creek Park administers Meridian Hill Park, which is the only National Historic Landmark that we administer. Now, Rock Creek Park itself is a historic district listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And a lot of our resources are also individually listed. So for example, the Pierce-Klingle Estate and Boulder Bridge are both individually listed. And then we have other sites like the Civil War Defenses of Washington, which is its own historic district. But in terms of NHLs, the only one that we have is Meridian Hill Park.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, I'm gonna see. So I guess while we wait for see if anybody else has any other questions, and if our friends on Facebook have any questions, I guess, Brad, is there like anything else you want folks to look out for, events or just anything that people should know?
So we are going to be having later this month Summer in the Parks, hosted by our friends at the Rock Creek Conservancy. So if you're interested in checking out any of those events, I'd highly recommend that you check out the Rock Creek Conservancy webpage, because they'll have all the details there. You can also find that information on our Facebook page and the Conservancy's Facebook page. So if you're looking for something to do this summer, check out Summer in the Parks. That program's been going on for a number of years now, and it's very, very successful, and people really enjoy it. So look for that.
Yeah, very exciting. Here, I'll put the link in the chat again, so people can find it easy. Let's see. I think we have time for a few more questions. Can you talk about the Holt House? Is it under the Smithsonian? Like, I guess their management?
What was the name of the house again, please?
The Holt House, H-O-L-T.
I am not familiar with the Holt House, so I cannot say.
It's okay. I'll look that up.
But it is not Rock Creek. I can at least say that much.
Okay. So Jim says, you mentioned a boathouse. Was that the Thompson Boathouse? And is that privately owned?
So yes, the boathouse that the Park Service manages is the Thompson's Boathouse or Boat Center. That's located at the intersection of the Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway and Virginia Avenue. It is owned by the National Park Service, but it is operated by a concessionaire.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Okay, well, Zach, who's our community outreach and grants manager, he said the Holt House is at the National Zoo, so could be under Smithsonian then.
Likely, okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Zach. Yes, somebody else confirmed that as well, the Holt House. Okay, thank you. I think that is all the questions that we have. Does anybody else have any other questions at all? Throwing that out there. You can follow, Rock Creek Park has social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter. I think it's at Rock Creek NPS. I put that in the chat as well. So I think that's another good place to keep up to date on what's going on at the park. Encourage y'all to follow them there. All right, well.
And if anyone wants to take a deeper dive into the early history of the park, we have on our website a administrative history of Rock Creek Park. So this goes through all of the early happenings from when the park was being conceived, the passing of legislation to create the park, the various different agencies that manage the park up until the Park Service came into the picture. So if you want to take that deeper dive into the history, that is available on our website. So again, check it out.
Yeah, what a great resource. Let's see. I'll wait till we get another question. Oh, nope, people are just saying thank you and thank you for the wonderful presentation. And I'll echo that. Thank you so much, Brad, for such a wonderful illustrative history of this park. And I learned so much. I'm sure others in the audience, we all learned something new today. And thank you again, for your expertise and taking the time to talk to us all today. We really appreciate it.
You are so welcome, Melissa. A big thank you to you. And thank you again to the DC Preservation League for inviting me to speak with you all today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. All right, well, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at future events for DCPL or at Rock Creek Park. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Great, thank you.